what you're going to notice is that we have a garden that's about 50 feet long this way and about 20 feet deep. We'll kind of get more into that throughout this tour. But I hope that you can realize that in any kind of modest backyard, you can have the same thing. Maybe not the exact same dimensions, but approximately the same amount of square footage. In this garden right here, we grow a ton of food. So much food that we don't need to utilize other areas of our yard, which we easily could. We've got right here a ton of produce going on. As a matter of fact, there's so much going on, sometimes I even forget myself. We have pumpkins growing right here, which are doing really well. We like to grow the little white and orange decorative pumpkins for the fall. That's not necessarily for eating. Over here we have cherry tomatoes. They're growing up these teepee structures. And the reason why all that kind of ties together is because these teepee structures are put together by little saplings on our property, and we allow things to grow up them. They're held together by simple jute twine, which you can buy for almost nothing at Tractor Supply. I get about 1,000 feet, maybe 2,000 feet every year. And that's kind of what holds all of this together. And as things start growing up, I simply just take about 12 inches of jute twine, wrap it around, and then allow everything to grow up over here. So things like this, you can tell that it's just getting a little out of control. Typically, we're just gonna let everything grow to its max potential. But I normally actually, when it gets this long, just snip it off with a pair of little scissors like this, garden shears. Always get ones with springs, it's very helpful. I've been using this since we've been gardening, and with that paired up with jute twine, I can tie everything up here, and it really kind of just puts it all together. So there's chaos, but it's also organized to a certain point. The reason why I cut off the end of these vines is because if it continues to grow, with our shorter season here in Wisconsin, by the time we get to August, I want all the fruit on these vines, whether it's squash or pumpkins or cucumbers, to start growing, maturing, and get ready for a harvest. Why is that important? Because if I let the vine keep growing into September, there's no way that those fruit are gonna mature, and we're gonna end up with a lot of tiny squash in September that isn't even really ready to be brought inside yet. Not only because it's small, but it's just not ready. It's still green, they're not ripe, and we don't wanna deal with that. So usually by August 1st, which we're approaching quickly here in Wisconsin, I make sure all of my vines are cut and topped off so that the fruit can develop and ripen naturally. As you can see down here, we've got some basil because we have cherry tomato plants. This basil right here needs to come inside. It started flowering, so I took the flowers off. My wife makes pesto with that every year. You can see cherry tomatoes coming in right here. By the way, that's a 25-cent seed packet from the dollar store, and there's about 100 seeds, so that's the most affordable crop we grow. All the crops we do grow from seed here, starting indoors using a Vigo grow light in our spare bedroom. So it's very affordable. All of the seeds we purchase are very, very cheap. We try to use hybrids, but we also try to use heirlooms so we can save the seed year to year. It depends on the variety. Up here, because we're growing pumpkins and all of these vining crops, you can actually see these little pumpkins growing right now. And those are decorative pumpkins. I know that's not always the most popular choice for gardeners because they want to grow things they can eat, but we decided to have a little decoration this year. We also believe in pollination. That's a huge part of our garden. We grow a lot of fruit like cucumbers, squash, pumpkins. And we want to have marigolds like you see right here, because if you're growing fruit, for the most part, you're going to need pollinators. And we want to encourage that, but also what these marigolds do, which by the way, we do grow inside, starting from seed. It saves so much money. With these marigolds and other flowers, they deter pests. We've had problems with cucumber beetles in the past and other things, and these marigolds help deter that. We spray no pesticides, no herbicides, nothing. We use high quality soil that we buy in bulk in all of our raised beds, and then we incorporate that with our chicken manure, which is composted right next to the garden over there. We've got another large pumpkin plant. We have 2 of them here and 2 back there. They grow up these poles like this. I let this one get away on me, and now they're actually rooted in the soil, so this pole is probably going to be empty. But you can see back here, this is the intention, is to have everything growing up there. Over here to the left, we have cucumber plants growing up these poles right here. It looks chaotic, but it's really not too bad. There's the flowers. And as a matter of fact, back here, I can actually see a cucumber coming in right there. Obviously it's pretty small. We like them to be cucumber size, not pickle size. And then this whole thing is just a teepee trellis, chaotic mess. But we love it because it all works together. We believe diversity is key in a garden. Plants do better together. If you ever look at a forest naturally, you don't see typically one type of tree and one type of bush throughout. You see a mixture of things that work together. These are Better Boy tomatoes, which is our slicer tomatoes, which we eat fresh. We never can those. And again, we've got a large basil plant. Why basil? Because basil helps deter pests that bother tomatoes. They work well together. And if we're going to make salsa or something like that with our tomatoes, we've got our basil plant. They typically ripen together. They like warm climates. And so it's just a good combination. Wherever we have a tomato plant, we've got basil. Wherever we have a fruit plant, a vining plant, like tomatoes or squash, or pumpkins or cucumbers, we have marigolds to deter the pests. And this is just in our 4 by 18 foot raised bed. It's 4 feet wide and it goes 18 feet long. That way we have 3 of them in our garden. Our garden is completely covered with wood chips where we walk. It makes a nice clean look. It's easy to have a wheelbarrow. It's easy to walk in here and show people, tend your garden. We don't really work out here too much. It's very self-sustaining the way it's set up. But these really long raised beds over here make things really, really easy to work with. And it's just a joy to be out here. It's not a muddy mess with erosion on the ground. This whole thing has cardboard underneath it to stop the weeds from coming through. Do we have weeds here? Yes, but they pull out really well. And we don't have a lot of weeds to begin with, comparatively speaking, when we used to have a garden that was in ground before we did the wood chips and before we changed our philosophy of how we're gonna grow food here at our house. So we just talked about this 4 by 18 raised bed over here with the pumpkins, the cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, all kinds of things. You can see a lot of pollination going on with flowers over here. It's pretty intense what's going on right here. But if we go to your right or my left, this is a little bit less intense because this bed is solely devoted to butternut squash. And butternut squash, we use Waltham butternut squash, which is a heirloom variety from M.I. Gardner. Best squash we've ever had, and it's one of the best foods we've ever grown and something that is our staple in our garden. If I can grow one thing for the rest of my life in this garden, it's going to be Waltham butternut squash. You can see we have quite a bit right here already started, and we are in Wisconsin as a reminder, so July going into August, we do want a lot of fruit to be about this size. You can see some honeybees pollinating right there. And in each raised bed, we have 13 poles growing up, creating teepee structures. Actually, this is one of the vines that just gets carried away. I snip that off. I snip that off. It prevents the vine from growing and encourages the fruit to have more energy be put into it. So once these vines get crazy out of control, I throw the tip of them into the chickens. They can compost it, and these vines stop growing, and it gives more energy to the fruit like this one, which is still quite small yet. These things get really big. And then you've even got a little guy up here. Since we have 13 squash growing in this raised bed, we have 1 squash plant per pole. I use jute twine, I wrap it around, and the jute twine, as you can see right here, not only secures the fruit, but secures the vine across on these cross beams, as well as how it grows up each pole. So you've got a pole here. The plant actually grows up this pole supported by this jute twine, which is compostable. So if you're worried about jute twine and having like chemicals in your garden, it's not. They break down just like anything else. Squash do have these what we call tendrils, but they're pretty useless. These don't really cling on to anything. They don't support the plant. You can even cut these off if you want them out of your way. They do absolutely nothing, which is why we need to use this jute twine right here. So we've got 13 plants in this entire garden. Again, we've got massive marigolds right here. The only thing I'm growing in here are marigolds to deter pests, increase pollination, and butternut squash, the Waltham butternut squash. We have quite a few squash growing already. I would say just in this bed alone, at least 20, if not more. And you can see an abundance of squash growing here. Of course, they have a lot of growing to do. I imagine this one's going to get quite a bit bigger. These are pretty large. They've been growing for quite some time. And a whole bunch growing over here, as you can see as well. If you have children, it's great for children to eat because it's a little sweeter. It's easier for babies to start eating instead of crappy baby food you buy in the store. Give them real food with real nutrition. So that's our philosophy. And having this setup right here gets them off the ground, increases airflow, reduces pests, easier to manage, easier to see. Everything's just easier when you do it like this, and it actually makes your garden look a lot better as well. So that's our second large raised bed. That's 4x18. That's our middle one. Behind me, you're gonna see our third one, which is also 4x18, made out of cedar fence pickets so they don't rot nearly as fast as typical pine lumber you'd purchase at Home Depot or something. And we not only have squash over here that I just showed you, the Waltham butternut squash, we have 13 more over here because it's so versatile. It's a winter squash which literally lasts a year in our basement or more. I've had it go 13, 14, 15 months in our basement, which is slightly cooler, dark, out of the sun. And these squash, after you harvest them, you put them on some newspaper on a shelf in your basement. These are all Waltham butternut squash. You can save the seeds from year to year. It's really easy to do. And what we do then is we have squash literally for the rest of the year, all the way not only up till we plant more squash, but until we harvest more if you grow enough. So we want as much butternut squash as we possibly can. And instead of having the typical yellow marigolds that everybody thinks of that they purchase at a store, like a garden center, like at Walmart or Home Depot, we like to use the orange ones, the red ones, and the yellow ones just to diversify things. And when you're growing from seed, you have the ability to do that because you can pick any color you want when you get them in the seed packets. And typically we get seed packets as cheap as we can when it comes to flowers. We don't spend a lot of money because you don't have to spend a lot of money. They typically do pretty well. There's one exception with this bed, and that is this plant right here, which is a zucchini. We're really big on zucchini. We like making zucchini bread, using it in stir fry, and you can see this one's doing really well. These two zucchini right here, this one and that one, will need to be harvested today. We grind it up, or we shred it up, I should say, like you'd shred carrots or something. And then we freeze it, and then we take it out when we want to make zucchini bread little by little. So if it's next week we want to make some, take a bag out of the freezer. And if it's the week after, take another bag out of the freezer. But that way we have zucchini to make fresh zucchini bread throughout the winter and not make 50 loaves of zucchini bread in a weekend, then freeze those, take up all the freezer space. We just keep them frozen, shredded in freezer bags out in our garage actually. This was the raised bed we were just looking at, the 4x18 with all of the Waltham butternut squash. But next to it we had a little space, so I took some little trees from our property. This one needs to be replaced eventually. And then some 4x2-inch wire field fencing. And that gave me the opportunity to plant really good pole beans. Now these green beans are Rattlesnake green beans. They're an heirloom. We haven't purchased green beans since the years ago when we actually got these. These are from the original seed packet. We had one seed packet which created all of this and some other beans I'll show you later. But Rattlesnake green beans are absolutely incredible because you can save the seeds. If you end up planting Rattlesnake green beans, pole beans like this, you really don't need a lot of fertilizer. We put this right into our native soil, which is not great, I can tell you that. It's much better in our raised beds that we brought in, where you're gonna get beautiful beans like this. They've got little like purple streaks on them. These are absolutely perfect to harvest. What I do is I put the plant up and pull up this way, and then you're left with this to either freeze, can, eat fresh, whatever you'd like. And if you came out here and harvested whatever this is, 18 feet or so of green beans, you're gonna end up with more green beans than you know what to do with, not to mention all the other places. So I highly recommend, if you do have Rattlesnake green beans like we do, this variety, you just start with maybe an 8-foot fence, 4 feet high, 5 feet high. This is 5 feet here. Do that your first summer and see how you manage that, because you're gonna end up with way more green beans than you even know what to do with. It gets pretty intense. Now we're looking at the north side of the garden, which is behind me. The green beans are over here. We've pretty much taken care of the south side of the garden. And we have what I call our little raspberry experiment. I've got a 1 by, I would say 12 or 10 raised bed here. It's about 6 inches off the ground. These are raspberries that I've actually taken from the raspberry plants that grow around our yard, on the edge of our yard. A lot of yards have raspberry plants that grow up if you live out in the country like we do. And so I took 6 plants. There's one here, one here, one here, and then 3 more over here. I just put them in our little raised bed in the spring, and I was like, hey, we'll see what happens. And then I just took this yellow rope I had in my garage and said, hey, let's tie them up and see if we get some. And we are getting a lot of flowers and we are getting some raspberries. I expect this just to get better each year. The fact that it costs me nothing to get these plants, you can still, doesn't really bother me, because if it doesn't work, I'll just plant something else. We're getting a little raspberry there. We've got a nice, beautiful one over here, as you can see, and many more that are going to develop here. I just thought it might be interesting to see if we can get wild raspberries to grow in our garden that are going to be more plentiful than the ones that grow on the edge of our yard. So they get better sunlight here. And I really think that's a good thing for these raspberries, rather than being on the edge of our yard and just having minimal sunlight. The raised bed behind me is 5 feet by 10 feet. And this is a cool raised bed because we have two really large zucchini plants that are actually different from the original one I showed you in the large bed over there. These zucchini plants are called Black Beauty from MI Gardener. This is what I'd recommend. They're extremely disease resistant. You get a lot of zucchini. You can just tell right here with this big zucchini growing on the edge over there. Notice I snipped a lot of these stalks so that the pollinators, like the bees, can actually see the flowers easier. Otherwise, these leaves really hide. And if you don't trim up your zucchini like I did and expose some of the flowers, you'll notice you don't get as much zucchini per plant. So that's a little tip. Just snip the flowers off. You can snap them off if you want, like this. But what helps is that they can get in there and they can see the pollination, or they can see the flowers to pollinate. So I would say between these two plants, we've got two zucchini here, a nice one over there, one back there. I know it might be kind of hard to see, and on this plant over here, we've got at least 4 growing there, and I expect as many as you see here to double by the time we get to September. So if there's 4 here, you can expect 8, if not 10 from each plant. Behind these zucchini plants, we've got 2 pepper plants. These are just bell peppers. I think this one's yellow. I marked it with this yellow tag here. And you can see a couple growing. It doesn't get a lot of sun because of the zucchini. And there's another one over there that's a red bell pepper. Again, not doing great because of these zucchini. We had a little bit of extra space. I had a couple pepper plants. I just threw them in. If we've got space in our garden, we're putting stuff in it. These are Supremo Roma tomatoes. I like Supremo and Picus the best. I know there's other varieties, but these are hybrid tomatoes, and they are determinate, which means they get to a certain size, they stop growing, and put all of their energy into making tomatoes or fruit. 4 large plants. They're absolutely massive, as you can see. We're getting a lot of tomatoes on them right now, but these are very small tomatoes compared to what we're gonna get. They'll actually be almost the size of a pear. From these 4 tomato plants, we're gonna have a ton of tomatoes for making sauce and tomato soup, whatever you want to do with them, which is why we grow so many Roma tomatoes. We have 4 right here, and then I'll show you our additional ones in just a little bit. But as you can tell, they're doing really, really well. They're in a 12-inch bed, but they're already taller than I am, and I'm almost 6 feet tall. So for Roma tomatoes that are determinate, to get this big and to do this well is pretty impressive, which is why we always go with Supremo or Picus Roma tomato varieties. We get really big tomatoes and a lot of them per plant. We use heavy duty tomato cages that can support them. If they get a little out of control, I can use jute twine and kind of tie them up like this, which is what I might do later on today. But overall, they're doing really, really well, and we're super happy with how well these tomatoes are doing. The bed we were just referring to is over here. Again, big marigolds. This started with like 3 little flowers, and then they just expand, take over, and we just let them do what they're gonna do. We don't really trim those back. So that's that 5 by 10 raised bed. Over here we have 4 by 5 and another 4 by 5. Got some weeds here to pull out. And what you see are our strawberries, which we're eventually gonna move to a different bed. But our strawberries do really well. Being this late into the summer, these are going to be only producing fruit around the end of June, which they've already done. We harvested as much as we could, and now we're gonna let them rest for another year until next year. So unfortunately I can't show you that because they're just strawberries. And if you know anything about strawberries, they don't really produce all year long unless you get everberry. They produce a couple times. These ones only produce in June, which is why they're done and they're just kind of hanging out, taking up space right here. These 2 beds right here from 2 years ago came from 2 plants. There's a plant here and a plant there, and they just took over, created runners, created little plants. So If you ever want to get strawberries for free from somebody, find out a person who's selling them in your area. I'm sure they'd be happy to give you some plants, which is probably what I plan on doing with these over here. Just like the other bed we were looking at, the 5x10 behind the camera there with the zucchini and those Roma tomatoes, we've got 10 Roma tomato plants right here, and these are doing really well. Again, they're the Supremo variety, a hybrid variety. I always recommend growing hybrids if you can for bounty and abundance. You typically get more. If you're looking for self-sustainability, you want to go with an heirloom variety. We've got basil plant right here, another basil plant right there, because we're combining them to deter pests. Basil goes with tomatoes, tomatoes goes with basil. So once these are all ready, which we've got about a month before they have all their fruit producing, big red tomatoes, I plan on making a lot of tomato juice this year, freezing it, taking out fresh throughout the year. On this one bed alone, we have 10. I imagine that by the time this is done, we're gonna have, do I dare say, 100 pounds of tomatoes or more. We've grown far less than this before, and we've filled up tables in our kitchen with tomatoes. So we're really looking forward to having tons of tomatoes. Our Roma tomato bed is over there, and then next to it, in a little tiny, like 8-inch wide raised bed that is outlined by these log borders to separate the grass from the garden, we have more rattlesnake pole beans. These are green beans, and these are doing very well like they were over there. This is by far our best growing crop, in addition to the Roma tomatoes, I would say. My advice is once they grow up, whatever you have them grow up, it could be a ladder, it could be a fence, is once they get too tall and they start flopping over, snip it off like this, because that prevents your plants from flipping over and becoming a mess, and keep growing to put energy into the plant instead of energy into producing more flowers and more beans. So once they get about maybe 6 inches above the fence, I cut them off like I need to do with this one over here. There's a couple of them. Don't worry about hurting your plants, you're not gonna hurt it. Come out here every other day, cut it off. That way they produce more beans here and they don't keep growing up, putting energy into the plant, flopping over, creating a mess. And sometimes they even grow up our cattle panel trellises like they're doing right here. I kind of just let it do its own thing. On the other side of this cattle panel trellis, we've got green beans growing anyway, and they're kind of up here creating a big mess. We've got a lot of beans growing over here halfway up this cattle panel trellis. This half was supposed to have green beans. Unfortunately, we had a deer visiting us one night, kind of wiped out all of these green beans and didn't touch any other green beans in our garden. It was kind of weird, but it just wanted these ones and stopped. So I put a couple of cucumber plants, knowing it was late in the season, kind of assuming that we weren't going to get any. I had an empty space, I had a couple of extra plants, I stuck them in there that we grew from seed inside. Over here, we have yet another zucchini plant. Underneath our arch trellises, we want to do one big zucchini, some kind of flowers, and then growing things up the sides. Instead of having an arch trellis go from one raised bed to the next that you can walk underneath, what we do is we have a little tiny raised bed that's 5 feet wide, 4 feet deep. You want 5 feet at the base of your arch, your cattle panel arch trellises. That's gonna give you this nice solid support. It's gonna be enough to walk underneath if you want. It's not gonna be too wide, it's not gonna be too narrow. So these little raised beds are really helpful for us. Again, we have some marigolds in there too. And typically we have this whole thing covered in beans, but unfortunately, right now, this season, we only have one side covered in green beans, which is what you can see all right here. These really nice green beans that we need to harvest today, either to eat fresh or to freeze. You'll notice that I'm actually standing by the lid of our septic tank. I'm directly above the tank right here, which is why we put these raised beds the way it is. I designed this so people can still access the tank if they have to. And that's why we have these potato grow bags right here. This is what they look like when they're completely dead and they're ready to harvest. The good thing about potatoes is you can leave them in the ground, kind of like carrots if you want to. I tend to do that until all of these plants have died off, and then I'll harvest them at one time the same day in a wheelbarrow by tipping them upside down. Back here, we've got another 9-in-1 Vigo garden raised bed that I really love, and these actually have bell peppers in them that are doing quite well. So well that I actually need to stake them up like this because they were tipping over. Nice big stalks, peppers growing here. Well, they will be big eventually. Right now, they're just kind of in the middle of their stage of developing into peppers. Just as a side note, all of our raised beds, including our grow bags, have mulch on it. We like to use at least an inch, if not 2 or 3 inches of leaf mulch, which is just chopped up by our lawnmower every fall, put it in a big pile, and then pretty much litter our entire raised beds. It helps keep out the weeds. It helps retain moisture. It helps keep the soil at consistent temperature. If you're not mulching your garden or your raised bed gardens, you're missing out, because it really does make a really big difference. As you can see, there's a lot going on in the garden behind me. It's organized, but it's chaotic, but it's still fun and part of the journey. I couldn't imagine having a different garden than this. Hopefully you learned something, but if you have any tips and advice you would like to give me that might help, especially with some of our problematic areas in the raised beds that I showed you, make sure you put that down in the comments below. Thanks for watching Together We Harvest. I'm so glad you spent this time with me and stuck with me to the end of the video. Hope to see you on the next one.